Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our roundtable this evening, exploring the question, citizenship education, where next? I'm Marcus Bargava, Chair of ACT Board of Trustees, and I'll be chairing proceedings this evening. It's now 26 years since our honorary president, Lord Blunkett, set up an advisory group to consider the case for citizenship education in schools, culminating in the Crick report a year later. Whenever I reread the report, I'm struck by the contrasts and continuities with where we are now. The missionary zeal felt by our subject community may owe rather a lot to the report's aim of no less than a change in the political culture of the country. The Crick report's central concern with the state of British democracy will be shared today. It quotes the Lord Chancellor's warning that we dare not be complacent about the health and future of British democracy. Unless we become a nation of engaged citizens, our democracy is not secure. It draws attention to high levels of apathy, ignorance, and cynicism in society, a year in which only 14% of the UK population used the internet, compared with 98% today. Teachers now face immense challenges in tackling misinformation, abhorrent attitudes and behaviours which are difficult to comprehend or justify. A recent survey by Youth Expression of 3,000 Year 10 pupils stated that only 38% of students felt safe in expressing their views on social and political issues at school, with 52% choosing to keep their feelings private when classmates expressed disagreeable views. So as we look to the next 25 years, we at ACT want to consider where we go next. We have called for a national education action plan for citizenship and civic learning. We build on strong foundations. We have 20 years of experience, a vibrant subject association, a talented, energetic and activist subject community, and excellent research. Our national education plan is based on 5 big ideas. And tonight we want to broadly explore 3 questions. The first is around how we get citizenship education back on the agenda and strengthen its presence in all schools. Our subject has faced major challenges over the last decade or so, facing threats to our existence and sustainability. Many schools continue to teach impactful citizenship, but as the Chief Inspector suggests in her annual report, the curriculum offer in secondary schools does not match the scope and ambition of the national curriculum, and too few schools prioritise the subject. How do we change this? The second question is around what more we can do to influence education policy to better support citizenship education. Although it survived as a national curriculum subject, unfortunately, education policy rarely treats it as such. How can we influence policy to change this situation so citizenship has equity of treatment, with a pipeline of expert teachers provided via expanded initial teacher education and CPD? The third question asks if citizenship education should look different in the future. ACT is committed to having a big conversation about how we take the subject into the future. Our political culture, our civil society, and our education system has changed profoundly in the last 25 years. Much of this change has impacted on what we teach, how we teach, and indeed if we teach at all. How might the subject evolve considering current challenges and future possibilities? So I'm delighted to be joined by our esteemed panel of experts this evening. Lord Blunkett, our honorary president, and the person who gave our subject its rightful place in the national curriculum, will kick us off and lead our discussion. Professor Lee Jerome from Middlesex University and PI for ACT's Active Citizenship in Schools Research Project, and Dr. Alison Boddy from the University of Kent and PI for the Children's Philanthropic Power Project, will then present their research findings and recommendations. Stuart Vaughan, head of the Priory School in Hampshire, and Helen Blatchford, our chair of that council and my fellow trustee, will then lead the response to what we've heard. And then finally, it will be over to you guys and we'll pull in questions from the chat. And unfortunately, Craig Wright cannot be with us this evening. So Please do join in the discussion by using the chat function to ask any questions of our panel. And if you've not done so already, please can I ask that you mute. And so we start tonight with our Honorary President, Lord Blunkett, who will begin our consideration of these questions. And over to you, Lord Blunkett.
And it's David. I haven't changed. And a very, very warm welcome to everyone who's logged in this evening. My thanks to you, Chair, and the other trustees, to Liz and the team, and of course to everyone who's on the ground doing the chalk face, as we used to call it, when we were using chalk. And when I first qualified as a teacher so long ago, I'd rather not say, we were actually using chalk. And in my case, it was active citizenship, because I used to get the young people I was teaching post-16 to actually write on the board. Those were the days of co-delivery. So thank you to everyone who's keeping the flag flying, keeping the subject alive in what is, by anybody's standards, a dangerous moment in time. Because we've got a number of panelists and you want to hear them and to be able to open it up, I should be very brief. Suffice it to say, if we ever needed a description of why democracy and citizenship teaching was absolutely vital, we only need to look at the election result in Holland, what's happened in Argentina, the revelations at the COVID inquiry about how our politics have been conducted, and, if I might say so, poor old Stockton-on-Tees, who didn't deserve, one way or the other, what was said about the town last week. We know that things are difficult. They were back at the turn of the century, when there was the rise of Pim Fortuyn in Holland, when we saw the runoff of the French presidential election, when Le Pen got through to the final phase. We've seen the rise of the far right taking control of the premiership in Italy and elsewhere. We live in troubled times, and we always used to point to what was happening here and under Trump in the US, but of course much more difficult challenges now. And we've never needed a greater understanding by young people, including how to make that safe space for a proper dialogue where people can respect each other's differences and points of view. I think there is some optimism. I think there's some hope. Martin Oliver, who's taking over as the Chief Inspector, has supported citizenship at the Outward Multi-Academy Trust. Catherine McConnell, who is our new Shadow Education Minister for the opposition, is deeply committed to citizenship education. I had a meeting with her last week. We have, at least for the time being, a more sympathetic minister in Damien Hines at the department, and we have a select committee chair who regrettably is standing down, who's a Conservative who really cares about citizenship education. That's Robin Walker, for those who are not familiar with him. We know that the big ideas are crucial. You mentioned, Chair, the third one, and that, of course, incorporates the challenges of what's happening with social media, with artificial intelligence, what we can believe and what we can't believe, the way in which people are, quotes, influenced, close quotes, by so-called influencers, and how that whole new landscape, completely out of my sphere of knowledge, can actually be brought to bear in terms of young people's understanding. And perhaps how ACT can also link up with other organisations. Talk to Liz about the BYE, the back youth, if you like, association, singing about what's working best, spreading it, using the materials that ACT can put together, and trying to work out how we can reach those parts of the education system that don't see how crucial education for citizenship really is, both in terms of enhancing the broader level of knowledge and commitment and motivation, and in terms of producing citizens of the future. Your big idea number 5 on the democratic school, make sure people don't misunderstand that they're not going to be voting on whether they have to do their own work or not, but that every school should embed an understanding of where power lies, how decisions are taken, how institutions do or do not work, and above all, what part each and every person can play, no matter how small, in making the world a better place. You're all doing it. I'm personally very grateful for you keeping that torch alive, and I'll continue to do my best to ensure that in the future it gets the support it deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. That's wonderful. And there's a comment in the chat of someone saying, please pass my thanks to David for starting this subject. Been ahead of citizenship since 2010. It's a hugely important subject, loved by my students, and continues to be incredibly relevant. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on then. So can I please introduce you to Professor Lee Jerome, who is very well known and loved in our subject community, who's going to be presenting his current research on his Active Citizenship in Schools project. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks very much, Marcus. So I've got 6 minutes, I think, to talk. And I'm just going to share with you some initial highlights from the research I've been doing with ACT for the last couple of years. So in 2 years ago, we did a literature review looking at the evidence from around the world about the impact that teachers had on the kind of active citizenship outcomes that we're all interested in. And we used that to design a couple of surveys, which ran last year. So one for teachers of citizenship and one for students. We had just over 1,000 students last year. And so we're able to look at kind of what teachers say they're doing in their practice and a little glimpse as to what students say they're receiving. So I'm going to whiz through and say something about the content that's going on, or what people are getting in the name of citizenship, something about the teaching processes, and then something about this whole school dimension that David was alluding to. So in terms of content, one of the things that we've observed is that teachers seem to be more enthusiastic about issues-led teaching, by which we mean things like teaching about the nature of inequality, teaching about media and social media. Lower down the list in terms of frequently taught subjects were the more overtly political issues, like teaching about governance structures and how democracy actually functions, how elections work. But interestingly, for those people who have come here as subject specialists, the exception was people who were trained as citizenship specialists, who were more likely to teach about that specialist political content and more likely to move beyond the social issues kind of curriculum. But surprising for all of us, the least frequently taught social issue under the banner of citizenship was around environmental change and sustainability. So there's obviously something going on there about the selection of choices, and maybe about how choices are framed, because when we talk to children, they say they are being taught about this, but when we talk to teachers, they say it's not happening through the citizenship curriculum. So maybe it is still firmly rooted in geography and other subjects. The other thing I wanted to say about knowledge is that we have a bank of questions which aren't recall factual questions, but they're political reasoning questions. And because the survey runs from year 7 to year 10, we were able to note that there is very little general improvement in political literacy or political reasoning from year 7 to year 10, which from my perspective means that we really need to redouble the effort to make the curriculum a consistent entitlement, because it really reinforces the idea that they might be making progress in all their other subjects, but we can't assume that will translate into the kind of political literacy we're interested in. In terms of the teaching processes, I think we're all relieved to know the most frequently used teaching strategies from teachers' perspective was discussing controversial issues, discussing contemporary issues in the news, and discussing local issues. And that is entirely paralleled by students' experience. Those are the 3 things they told us they do most routinely in class as well. The flip side, well, not the flip side yet, I'll just say something else. We also asked teachers to rate their ability to create what we call an open classroom climate. And almost it felt like we needed a new scale, because pretty much everyone was in the top 10% of the available room on the scale for saying we create that classroom climate. And I think that the fact that all of the children, by and large, said, yeah, we're routinely having discussions about local, topical, controversial issues, should give us some reassurance that we haven't had that squeezed out of us yet as a subject community. The thing that probably was surprising for me was that teachers said they used role plays and simulations fairly infrequently. And in our review of the literature, we found that they were really impactful and obviously much easier to teach than these big kind of outward facing community action projects. So we think there's probably some way to go about having a conversation with teachers about making the most of those opportunities. And in relation to the whole school dimension, we put together a bunch of questions which look like they're about different things, but actually we've called them student perception of school ethos. It covers topics like how do students perceive their relationships with teachers and with their peers? How do they perceive how well the school listens to their views and acts on their views? And also, it's a slightly cheeky question, when we asked them what topics they were taught, we also asked them how enthusiastic they thought their teachers were when they taught them those topics. And students who are positive, well, the interesting thing is, if you're positive about one of those, you tend to be positive about all of them. So they cluster very nicely around this collection of attributes around a positive school ethos. And the other thing was, it comes out as one of the biggest predictors of the kind of outcomes we're interested in. So taken together, that positive school ethos or positive perception of school ethos, plus prior experience of active citizenship activities, predict 32% of the variation in voting intentions as adults. Now, there's relatively little you can do with Key Stage 3 students about their prior experience of active citizenship before they come to you. So the one bit of that equation that you have control over is perceived ethos. And the other thing that perceived ethos works alongside is this notion of open classroom climate and a broader range of teaching and learning activities. So basically, the broader the range of teaching and learning activities and the more open classroom climates were used, plus a more positive school ethos, taken together, those three things account for 34% of the difference in students' perceived levels of trust. And that's trust in teachers, in the police, in the army, in the British government. So we take that together and create this kind of measure of social trust, which we know is the basis of social cohesion, of social capital, and a huge predictor of likelihood to get involved with politics. So one of the interesting things that comes out of that I think is informing our thinking about Act's 5 big asks or demands about the future of citizenship is that we really need to redouble our focus on the whole school dimension, because I think that big picture about the importance of ethos and how students engage with the school as an institution and the staff and their peers, basically how they engage with the school as a community, is also important for us in predicting some of our specific citizenship outcomes. And in terms of curriculum, I'll just draw out 2 things. The one thing I'll say is, I think if we're looking to lobby for a new curriculum, then I think the light touch should probably go in favor of bringing things like sustainability into a citizenship framework. I find it worrying from what I've read, but also from thinking about this as a political challenge for all of us, that students are encountering the climate change and sustainability without doing it explicitly through a citizenship or political framing. So it feels to me like that's quite an important thing to put back into the curriculum if we get another chance to redraft the curriculum. And then my bid for asking ACT to lobby for things would also be to put in some of that stuff we used to have about processes, because it feels like without a bit of guidance on processes, there are some potentially valuable pedagogies which are drifting and which aren't becoming central to students' experience. So I'll wrap up there because I've already gone over my 6 minutes. Thanks.
Absolutely fascinating. There's so much to say about all of that that hopefully we'll be able to come back to shortly. Okay, we'll go straight over to Alison.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think I'm going to echo quite a lot of what Lee has said. So my research focuses on children and young people's engagement as active citizens, with a particular focus on what is happening in primary education. In 2021, we were awarded funding from the ESRC for a project titled Educating for Public Good. This research questioned, how do primary school children learn to become active, civically engaged citizens? What opportunities are afforded to them to develop their civic learning? And importantly, how are these ideas framed? So how are they discussed and how are they enacted in the classroom? And we were also interested in whether or not there was equity and access to active citizenship education across primary schools in England. So, like Lee, as with any research programme, we started with an extensive international literature review exploring civic learning within primary education. Educational, social and development psychology theory and research consistently highlights middle childhood and primary school years, so ages 4 to 11, as absolutely crucial in the development and normalisation of our civic behaviours. As I'm sure all of us here know, younger children are capable of engaging in and expressing critical social and political thinking. And research really highlights the importance of being able to practice everyday civicness in a real world context within schools, and the importance of this experiential learning. And we also know that early engagement in civic, pro-social and pro-environmental behaviours increases likelihood of such engagement as an adult. However, research also highlights that inequalities in access to civic learning and our civic literacies exist from a very early age, and these only increase without specific intervention, and that the primary school years are all too often overlooked in both research and practice literature. So in carrying out this research, so far we have surveyed over 2,000 schools to map out what is happening across England. And we've interviewed over 100 primary school teachers to garner their lived experiences of delivering active citizenship education in schools. So whilst we've published findings and reports on this, which I'm really happy to share and I'll add to the chat in a bit, I just wanted to highlight 3 main findings for the purpose of this discussion today. So first, primary school educators are consistently committed to facilitating active civic learning. They see it as part of their purpose and part of their mission and why they became teachers. However, distribution of opportunities across schools is uneven. Children from more privileged communities have much greater access to opportunities to develop their civic skills and practice their civicness within our education system. This suggests from a really early age that these children are more likely to be prepared for an active civic life than those from maybe more disadvantaged backgrounds, thus potentially cementing inequalities in civic education and active citizenship from really early on. So we echo ACT's 5 big ideas for the future of citizenship education, recognising that all primary age children want to talk about the big issues of the day and deserve to also benefit from citizenship education. Second, the majority of active citizenship activities within primary schools are discussed within a contributory, personally responsible approach. This approach encourages acts of responsibility in the community, such as giving to a charity, and assumes that solving social and environmental issues requires an individualistic response. So, for example, children are often encouraged to give to a food bank to support food poverty, but they are much less likely to be encouraged to question structural reasons why food poverty exists and other responses, such as government policy. So we argue that this overlooks the need for active collective participation and critical challenge of established systems, and risks denying children the opportunity to develop skills to consider more critical pathways to change. So alongside calling for a greater focus on citizenship education in primary schools, we also highlight a need for greater attention to be paid to participatory and justice-orientated approaches to engaging children in active citizenship within primary education. Third and finally, active citizenship education does not sit within a vacuum. It reflects lived experiences situated within an ecosystem of communities, civic actors, civil society and social structures, some of which perpetuate inequality which children are experiencing in their everyday lives. Teachers are now simultaneously encouraging active citizenship to tackle social issues, while also supporting children with lived experiences of these issues, which is throwing up multiple moral tensions for them. However, we've also identified that teachers experience multiple barriers to prioritising citizenship education, including time, resources, freedom within the curriculum, and a lack of recognition of teachers themselves as civic actors. So our third and final kind of call here is to call for a greater recognition of the importance of teachers as civic leaders and co-producers of active citizenship, which is embedded in lived experiences, collectively working with children, families, communities and civil society organisations to co-produce responses to social issues in a democratic way and give children a real meaningful access to active citizenship in these early years.
Thank you very much, Alison. That was great. Again, so much to unpack there. So hopefully the next stage of our event will allow us to do that. So hopefully we've got Stuart now and also Helen. So I'm going to start with Stuart. Welcome, Stuart.
Good evening, Marcus. My comments and reflections are around the three questions that were placed in front of us in advance of this. So around the promotion of citizenship, I think there are two ways you might approach this. One might be from the accountability model, from the Ofsted model around curriculum and frameworks. And I think that might be a misjudgment. I note that the Ofsted report on personal development came out at the end of last week. I note also that it refers to personal development as being as follows: personal, social, health, economic, and citizenship education. So out of those five very important areas, Ofsted themselves put citizenship fifth out of those five very important areas. So if we're waiting for an accountability structure to drive our own school improvement, it strikes me we might be waiting rather a long time. And Ofsted were very, very positive and complimentary about our school when it was Ofsteded just over a year ago. But actually that comes about not because Ofsted were telling us to do something, but because as a school we had a vision around citizenship that we thought was incredibly important, irrespective of Ofsted. And our vision is very much around a simple and basic structure, which is around what do we want a 16-year-old student who leaves our school to look like, to behave like, to feel and to think, to the extent that we can control that with teenage children. So our idea was around, and our vision is around, we want obviously young people to be good citizens, but also to be critical thinkers, to be engaged in their communities, and we mean local communities, but also national and international communities. So we construct a curriculum around that. And we very explicitly in our timetable have citizenship taught to all students. We have removed PSHE or PSCRE, as we previously called it, and we now have citizenship and RE, and citizenship comes first. So one of the ways in which you promote the subject is to talk about it and to have it enshrined in your curriculum. And of course, your challenges are always going to be around competing demands around the curriculum. But we believe fundamentally this is important, and we believe it's fundamentally important to our vision for our children. We will talk about, and it's become a slightly hackneyed term, but we talk about game changers, and we talk about game changer curriculum because we want our children to be invested with a range of different skills, but also a substantial amount of knowledge in these fields. So we construct a curriculum around that. Every child has citizenship on their timetable every year of their 5 years, and they can opt to take a full GCSE on top of that. But irrespective of that, everybody has equal access to our curriculum. We understand entirely it's not mutually exclusive. I take on board Alison's points entirely. It's not mutually exclusive of the rest of our curriculum. It's carefully intertwined with ideas around literacy and oracy, English and history as but two examples. So there is no sense that citizenship is divorced from the rest of the curriculum. It's integral and it's intertwined to the rest of the curriculum. When we're talking about some of the challenges about making the case for citizenship, one of the things we can think about is the ways in which it might address some of the problems that we have that are urgent and immediately in front of us. So take, for example, we are in the middle of an attendance crisis. I think everybody would accept that. Post-COVID, my attendance figures are horrifying in some respects, but there is a problem. And what leaders would always want, instead of more problems, they would like people coming with solutions. Citizenship is often, in our view, the vehicle that can provide some of those solutions. So if we are talking to students who are disenfranchised, who are disconnected from society and disconnected from the relevance of school, and we understand that attendance is a very complex, multi-layered problem, but if citizenship is done well, it is going to engender a sense of agency in young people. It is going to engender a sense of leadership and community responsibility, and hopefully a degree of relevance. If you have those three factors, I would argue you are more likely to have a sense of belonging. And it is a sense of belonging that is missing in a lot of the students that are not in school. So if we understand that citizenship has a greater calling beyond simply the content of the curriculum, that it can build those connections and develop a sense of belonging, we have some very powerful levers through citizenship that can be used to address some of our wider concerns. In terms of what we may be encountering moving forward, well, there will always be continuity and there will always be change, and we understand that. So when we're talking about continuity, we are talking about a set of values that were built up over a long period of time. Whether you call them human values or British values, they are shared values. They are principles that we live our lives by that are promoted through citizenship. The need for space and time to deliver this subject and to train people so they are confident in teaching the complex subject areas that we are talking about, that Lord Blunkett mentioned very eloquently at the start this evening. We need time and we need resources to train people. There, of course, will be change. 2 months ago, we were not talking about Gaza and Israel. 2 years ago, we were not talking about AI. But if we have the foundation stones of the right approach to citizenship, you have the foundations on which you can nimbly respond to situations as they arise. And what we are talking about here when we are talking about that is building culture. And you build culture with citizenship at the very heart of your personal development and very much at the heart of your curriculum. You are then in a position to build a child-centered curriculum. And what I mean by that is something, a vehicle, if you like, for understanding and organizing our responses to the world that we have around us, however much that world may change from day to day and month to month. That's what we've been trying to build. That's what we've had acknowledged. And that's what we continue to struggle with in very difficult times. But the principle and the underpinning principle is that we have in our mind at all times is that 16-year-old individual, that young adult that leaves our care and goes out into the wider world. And we want every single one of them to be equipped with the skill set and knowledge that is driven by the subject of citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was wonderful. Helen.
I know, to follow that, isn't it, really? I feel very fortunate that Stuart's my head teacher. So if I start there and think about the importance of school leadership, really, I've been incredibly fortunate to work at Priory for a good number of years now. And citizenship has always been at the heart of the school and its curriculum and its culture and its community. One of my roles that I took on sort of year and a half ago now is as Director of Personal Development across our multi-academy trust, the Bohunt Education Trust. So I see obviously what we're doing in Priory, but actually now we are on a process of evolution across our 9 schools, which is kind of a microcosm of a big community and a family of schools together. And at the heart of all of we're doing around game changers and evolving our curriculum is citizenship, right at the centre of that, with Priory as a flagship leading the way on that citizenship education front. And it is about having now a trust curriculum. So all of our students across all of our schools for 5 years have a citizenship taught curriculum, which can not only have the opportunity to develop skills with them and knowledge, but also helps them to build connections between our different schools, but also reflect their local context as well. So I think it's really important to state, obviously, from the outset around the importance that our school leaders have in leading the way in terms of our citizenship education for all of our young people around the country. And I think one of the other things that we've managed to do in our school and then rolling out across our trust is around teaching CPD training for all of our teachers, regardless of their subject, around how to handle controversial issues, how to navigate the landscape around political impartiality. And that's part of mandatory core training, CPD training for all of our staff across our trust. And I think that's really, really important that, yes, we have our expertise, but we also have other teachers quite often where it's their second, maybe their third subject as well. And we want to make sure they're skilled so that our young people are not at a disadvantage through our curriculum as well. And I think I'd also like to say there that all of our ITT institutions should be looking at developing the skills of our trainee teachers coming through as well. In terms of what I'd like to see for the future for citizenship, I'm going to build really, I suppose, on things that have already been said, but more focus around critical thinking. I have a real passion around media literacy. So that consumption of information and the use of various media sources, for me, it doesn't matter which platform we're using, but it's about the skills to critically engage with that information, analyse information, recognise that mis and disinformation, the skills to fact check, to understand bias. And I think that's more and more prominent in our teaching, certainly a priority and across our trust. Secondly, around connections between classrooms and the real world context, to allow for democratic participation, to allow our students to have a voice and take action. And we have got explicit teaching around how our students use oracy within our classrooms and how they can have a voice in terms of having a say in the curriculum and being allowed to express that and work with us in terms of co-planning. In some cases, some of our students have co-planned areas of our curriculum which are now being delivered to all students across the trust, and that's really exciting to see. I think we talked about some of those emerging issues as well. Citizenship has at its heart those skills and the knowledge, but it's also about being responsive to those issues that our young people are facing and hearing about day in, day out. And some of the societal impact of things like new technologies and the democratic implications of those. I'm thinking around AI, for example. Coming out of that pandemic as well, we've mentioned earlier about the greater emphasis on identities and intersectionality, how factors such as race and gender and sexuality are intersecting and impacting on our experience, our lived experience of citizenship, and making sure that we're ensuring that our students feel included and that sense of belonging. And I think ensuring as well that our content is tailored by region, by the students' lived experience, customising our curriculum to align with issues that are relevant to specific areas and demographics, and that responsive approach, helping us to maintain really that forward-thinking curriculum, which is equipping our young people for democratic life in a rapidly changing world. So it's about not being complacent, about moving, being nimble and responsive and flexible, but underpinned by that real clear structure and skills and explicit teaching as well. I'm sorry, my voice is going a little bit, so I'm going to stop there if that's all right, because I feel like I'm lots I've built on there from other people. But
thank you very much, Helen, and well done. I know you're struggling a little bit at the moment with the colds that so many of us have got. Okay, thank you very much. That was a really fascinating set of presentations and contributions. So we're going to move on to the questions now. I've filled up 2 pages of my book with things that people have got to say, so I'm going to try and make sense of some of that. But I think we'll go straight over to some questions. And I know that very early on, Arusa made a really useful comment, and I wonder if Arusa would like to come in and ask that question more directly.
Hi all, thank you for having me at this amazing and really insightful event. I posted the question in the comments, but I'll just read it out for everyone as well. I said that citizenship continues to be an important subject within the walls of our schools, but numbers of trainee teachers appear to be decreasing. And I can see that that's rapidly happening at a national level, not just for all subjects, but I'm talking in particular about citizenship education. While there are no bursaries available for the subject, despite how important we all think it is, how can we persuade ministers that in order to encourage our students to be empowered voters, we need empowered teachers coming into the profession?
Thank you very much. You raise a really good point, and something that's obviously close to my heart as a former citizenship PGCE course leader, and having set it up at Kingston University where I now work. So we have a particular problem, because I think we've got 4 or 5 providers left nationally. 3 of those are in the London area. So we clearly cannot achieve what we want to achieve in citizenship in terms of a pipeline of highly skilled teachers coming through, without being able to expand initial teacher education again, encourage people to come into it, and give them bursaries, which they deserve. We've still got brilliant people coming into the profession through PGCE courses, but it's not surprising that they sometimes feel that they're a bit underappreciated in policy, but also in terms of universities and SCIP providers having courses across the country which they can actually access. And I don't know if the panel want to pick up on that, about how do we fix that? How do we do something about that? Is there a way that we can be thinking differently about it? Because my suspicion is there's a lot of people that would want to do teach training in citizenship.
Marcus, I'll I'll say something. You might expect me to want to say something here. I suppose the pessimistic response of Arusa is, before we have a policy fix for citizenship training, we probably need a policy fix for teacher training, full stop, because it feels like the whole system is being kind of vandalized at the moment. So I think even in subjects where head teachers want to employ people, there seems to be a collapse in recruitment and training provision. So there is and for citizenship within that framework, there is an issue about supply, but there is an issue of demand, I think, and we do need to, you know, if there is no set of unfilled vacancies for citizenship specialists, then there won't be any great urgency in the DfE to fund citizenship specialist training. In the absence of that, there are some really optimistic things I'm seeing going. So there are very few specialist citizenship courses, but there are some very cleverly constructed hybrid multi-subject courses, which are frowned on officially, but people are finding canny ways to create them. And Marcus hasn't mentioned it, but his institution is one of them that runs a social science or social studies PGCE with citizenship as a strand. So it doesn't have to be funded as citizenship, but you can get the citizenship qualification from it. And in my institution, there's a humanities course. There is no humanities subject, but it's a way to pull together people who are going to share pedagogic approaches and will be expected to share some insights that can be brought fruitfully to bear on citizenship education. So they're training history, geography and RE teachers together, but actually have conversations about citizenship and are open to citizenship placements along the way. So I think while we're waiting for the big policy agenda to become a bit more positive, it's really interesting to see these grassroots developments going that kind of fly in the face of the policy pressure, but are keeping some interesting teacher training pedagogies and communities ticking away in the background. So come the day, I think there'll be plenty of people to step forward and start running them.
Thanks, Lee. I love it when a competitor institution promotes our course. It's just lovely. I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to come in on that. No, I think that's right. I think the whole system is pretty broken in teacher education. and the fact that the number of subjects now requiring bursaries is growing again, where, you know, there's more than 50%, well more than 50% of secondary subjects now requiring bursaries, kind of indicates that the problem that we face. And I think the other thing that Lee does pick up there is ways that we can ensure that citizenship becomes part of other things. So I know other places, they've got citizenship with RE. So there's lots of ways of getting it in there. Okay, we'll move on then. So I can see that there's a few things here, questions being raised about certain things, but I wonder if we've got Sarah, who might be able to come on. Hopefully we've got Sarah, who's put a question here. No, okay, Henry. We got Henry Tam here, who's just authored a book picking up on some of these things.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Henry, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I'd like to raise with the panel is whether on many of those key issues which they have all raised, is whether a type of narrative which can be developed, which can help the course of citizenship education much more. I think at the moment it tends to be perceived wrongly, of course, but perceived wrongly as a very dry subject, and potentially as just as a small part of the curriculum. I think we need to tackle head on, particularly when some in politics are trying to marginalize it even further. I think we need to shift the perception of it as a subject which is to counter the kind of me outlook in society, because this is what political narratives tend to do. They need you to say something which the rest of society, parents in particular, would resonate with them. So if you're talking about, just getting people to understand politics or citizenship issues more, they think they're more important things to talk about. But if you're saying that, look, we need to counter the kind of me, self-centered, selfish outlook, which is infecting society, a lot of people sit up when they hear things like that. And then you respond to say that, so how do we do this? We need to talk about how people can learn to work together, how people can learn to overcome conflicts, to reason together, find common ground in order to collaborate, to cooperate, in order to achieve a lot more than they can do on their own. And that leads into all the key issues which the panel has mentioned about citizenship education. That's precisely what citizenship education offers the children in schools, how to use critical thinking, collaborative working to achieve better results. But if we frame it in those dry terms, we won't get the public support for those very, very important, training and funding and all those issues. But if you get people, the public and parents in particular, to start sitting up and thinking, yeah, that's a problem with what we're facing now. The children and young people, they're mired in this kind of just self-centered way of looking at everything. Is me against everyone else. We need to turn it into working together, how the community, how a city, how a country can work together. And that's what citizenship education can offer. I think if we start to develop that narrative and people start to speak with one voice about the importance of working together, I think that would really help the course of citizenship education. And that in turn would help to address many of the issues which the panel has rightly raised. So I'd like to hear what others think about that.
Thank you, Henry. And that does draw attention, I think, a bit to what Alison was saying, particularly about the importance of lived experience and the fact that children and their parents are often confronting or dealing with some of these citizenship issues, and how we have an educative response to that is really important. I don't know if you want to come in there, Alison.
Yes, brilliant, thank you. So obviously citizenship education does look different in primary schools, not being part of kind of statutory curriculum. And in many ways, we do see this as a barrier within schools, but we also see some schools kind of picking this up and almost using the freedom to kind of do things in very different ways. And they really are orientated around ideas of collective action and collective community responses. So, for example, we're seeing primary schools getting involved in things like community organising, local projects and and a kind of local peaceful activism, for example, to really kind of drive change within their local community. But doing that, listening to children's voices and doing that with parents alongside them as well. I suppose we've been, as part of this project, we've been travelling around lots of schools more recently and visiting primary schools. And I'm not sure I have really kind of seen that kind of idea come out, certainly within the primary schools that we visited. What we found is schools that really, and children who really do want to get part in, do really want to engage with these narratives. I think where we've seen this be really successful is where the citizenship education isn't an add-on to the curriculum. It's not something we do on a Thursday afternoon as part of PHSE or something. It's the driving force of the curriculum in those schools. So it becomes the topic that you focus on in maths, in English, in geography. And actually, when we see those much more holistic approaches, what we're finding, and I really am reflecting on very emerging results as we're working through this data at the moment, is children with much higher senses of civic, political and social literacies to kind of be able to talk about this. And it's unbelievably empowering to be able to have a conversation with a Year 4 child who has an understanding of how the House of Commons works, an understanding of how they get their voice put into those situations. But that comes from a school that really reflects on that experiential learning, where children can, as I've said in the presentation, kind of practice their civicness in a kind of safe place, practice debate. And so I think that's kind of got to be the focus of primary education. Folks, I think probably Lee would probably have more to say about the secondary than I would.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think I was just going to bring in Lee, actually, because that kind of perceived ethos that Lee discussed, and about the levels of trust, you know, being impacted upon by the fact that children are getting to, you know, where they've been, where they can make sense of the ethos of their schools. They've experienced active citizenship opportunities, and they can think about how those apply, and the voice they have within the schools helps to bring it alive. And of course, those children then become much more positive about their educational experience in general. And I think it also comes back to what Stuart was saying about, you know, what do we want 16-18-year-olds to leave school with? What kind of citizens do we want to see leaving the education system, and how do these things contribute to it? And citizenship's always had a major part to play in that. But I don't know whether Lee, Stuart, you want to come in there?
Yeah, what I was going to say there, Marcus, is that, and in relation to what Henry was saying, is that our narrative is built around this concept, and it's very much an umbrella term of game changers. And the idea being that under that umbrella, citizenship plays an absolutely critical role, but it works in tandem, or works alongside, intertwined with other aspects of what we offer. So it's linked into all the different leadership opportunities that we give, whether that's sports leaders or digital leaders or reading leaders. And the idea behind a game changer, as we define it, is that students have an understanding and a responsibility to improve things that go beyond themselves as an individual. And that's the underpinning ethos of our interpretation of what we mean by that language. And that then underpins everything that we do in terms of the messaging we are giving to our community about what we are hoping for them to be by the time that they leave. So we're trying to crystallize that language and have that very clear narrative about the 5-year journey a child will have and what they'll be at the end of it.
Thanks.
And just to jump in on this point, I think Henry's right about the challenge, but I think there are other routes that schools sometimes go down to try and address this, you know, to tackle the excessive individualization and responsibilization of the curriculum. Liz and I have been working on this concept of democratic well-being as a lens for looking at this. And as an ex-secondary teacher, I think there were aspects of my PSHE practice that always used to make me feel uncomfortable. There are, you know, if we want to address well-being for young people and promote social collaboration and a feeling of kind of social bonding, you can do it literally by teaching people how to think more positively and to be more happy. Like Anthony Selsdon likes to think we could have a curriculum for happiness, but I don't want to be the teacher that has to teach people how to be happy. What I'd much rather be is the teacher that gets something they care about, that knots their tummy upside down with frustration or passion and unleashes the capacity of them to do something in the world. And there are some emerging bits of evidence that suggest that a side effect of that, a happy side effect, is a feeling of greater social bonding with people with whom you feel you share a passion, a greater sense of agency and efficacy because you can see the impact you're having, so you feel like you're more likely to be a positive agent for change, as Stuart was talking about, rather than a victim of circumstances or terrible political trends. And I think well-being could well be an interesting side effect from giving children more and more opportunities to participate in active citizenship projects, whether they're classroom or year or school or community-based, is less important than working in concert with other people who share a passion and can kind of facilitate your sense of being a useful part in society, able to make progress. So like Ali said, it's all early days with the data analysis, but we have all the bits in our survey to continue to explore this. And I think it feels to me as a teacher like a much more positive agenda to pursue than more and more introspection to think about why we're unhappy. Creating bonds of community seems to be the better route to go.
Thank you very much. Now we've got 17 minutes left, so I'm going to go over to Liz, who's been busily trying to look at the chat and make sense of it and see what other things that we might be able to bring together in the time we've got. Liz?
Great. Thanks, Marcus, and thanks everybody for the comments so far. There's been a lot in the chat, a really active chat, but some of the key ones, which are probably not a surprise, are how to make time and space within the curriculum that many people feel is overcrowded. And I know there's a considerable interest from you, Stuart, in somebody who has managed to achieve that as a leader in your school and is now influencing a whole set of schools across your multi-academy trust. What is it that helped you prioritise that other people haven't been able to do? And then additionally, there's been some comments around the lack of understanding by Ofsted inspectors who don't seem to be able to distinguish between citizenship and personal, social and health education. And also quite a lot of chat about the potential, even if it isn't a reality in every secondary school, we've seen it coming through Ali's work in primary, to link with the Sustainable Development Goals and the inner development goals, which I think links back to some of Lee's point about democratic well-being. But I think one of the key issues that's being surfaced is how to prioritise this, because if the market for citizenship and the appetite for citizenship grows amongst school leaders, then other things will start to follow, and it's how we get that to happen that's become a key issue.
So who wants to come in on any of that? Or Helen, I think.
I was going to say, interestingly, there's another bit in the chat there which is asking Stuart about our behaviour policy and whether it links to our citizenship curriculum. I mean, in terms of, it doesn't mention citizenship. However, we're looking at developing our what we're called community circles at primary school. So around building that sense of belonging and bringing our students together. And we've been working on this as staff to begin with, and building our oracy and building our community together as staff. And now we're rolling that out with our students. And that's kind of underpinning our relational practice with our students. So I think in that respect, I don't know if Stuart wants to jump in, but I think in that respect, citizenship probably is at the heart of our behaviour policy, or influencing some of our behaviour policy as well.
I would say it's at the heart of the culture we're trying to create.
Yeah.
And behaviour policy is an integral part of that. Whether it's actually explicitly written into our behaviour policy, the answer is no. Whether there may come a point where it is, the answer to that is yes. And to answer the question about the curriculum, you have to make difficult decisions, because everybody's got things they want in your curriculum. and nobody wants to take anything out. And that's where you make a value judgment in terms of leadership about what you think is most appropriately aligned to your values and your aims for your children. So we made the decision that we wanted to promote citizenship. That did not mean we got rid of personal and social health education, but it means that we redirected it and we restructure it through tutor time with the members of staff who know those individual students very well and are well positioned to do some of that work. So we built time that way. But you are going to be making uncomfortable decisions, because there is no curriculum that covers absolutely everything that you want a curriculum to cover. It's about whether you are prioritizing citizenship to such a point that it becomes more important than other important things. That's not comfortable, but those are the decisions as a leader you have to make. And we made a decision that citizenship was absolutely integral to our vision around game changers, but it predates that kind of terminology and language as well. It was absolutely vital for us in terms of our sense of ourselves as a school in our community. And that was the overriding factor. But those are difficult and thorny decisions to take about curriculum constructs and contents.
I think as well, if we, in terms of, for me, for our students, I think if we don't get this right, I always say that, that if they're not engaged and they don't feel a sense of agency, they don't feel they have a voice that they're listened to, I think if we don't get that right, then I think there's going to be an impact on all of their other subjects anyway, because I think this underpins everything else, that they see their worth and they see their voice and their value. And they have a say in that curriculum and in their school and in their local communities, then that's rolling out from that is that
and in the running of their schools.
Well, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
All of the capital investments and work we've done around the physical environment of the school has been driven by students and has been driven by student voice. And we can make those links very, very clearly, and that in turn is there to drive our culture and ethos that student voice is important to us, and students have agency and decision making around the school as well, in the right structure and in the right way, but we can identify it and we can show evidence of it, and we think that's important.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, their active citizenship has led to changes in curriculum, which they can see being taught across not only their own school, but also across the other 8 schools in our academy chain as well. They've written those lessons with me and they've been rolled out. They can see the physical impact that they're having on others as well.
I mean, obviously co-creation is a metacognitive skill, and it's an utterly vital skill for us to move forward in the future, and certainly in the higher education landscape. Lots of courses are moving towards co-creation, but the challenge is always that children haven't had the opportunity to do that because of the confines of our national curriculum and exam system, which makes it very much more difficult to really develop those higher order skills that we actually need people to be able to learn to do and use in their future careers. Alison.
Yes, so I just wanted to kind of come in from a primary perspective on this, and I see that Clive's raised in the chat about Cambridge Primary Review, which looked at how empowered children felt, and those who engaged in work citizenship felt more empowered when they left school. So obviously we see, and research supports that we see plenty of positive outcomes for children and young people as well. But there's also a narrative around this that we're finding through our research that shows really positive impacts for the schools. So teachers who feel that they have civic agency within their school, that active citizenship is an important part, are much more likely to talk positively about their role in education. They're much more likely to talk more positively about staying in education as well. So there's a recruitment and retention argument here as well. And they also talk about, with those very kind of community-centric approaches, much more positive relationships with parents, and perceive a really positive impact upon behaviour within their school as well when they take these when they take forward projects that are focused on active citizenship, that are focused on on ideas of collective action and kind of collective belonging as well. So I think that's important parts of the narrative around citizenship education, particularly within the primary sphere.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, time is running out for us. So there's a few other comments here. I'm just wondering, we've got Mark from NCS here, and I don't know if there's anything that you want to talk, ask a question of Mark about connections to the work that you do, or comments or things that you think have particularly interested you tonight. Doesn't seem we have Mark. So Sarah told me off earlier because I was too quick. So maybe I'll leave that hanging. And Sarah, I'm sorry for not getting to you a little bit earlier, but do you want to come in now and share your comment and question?
Oh, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, sorry about that. No, mine was just over Lee's research actually, and the importance of active citizenship, that any curriculum of future citizenship should have. Some of the research questions students have been looking at which was really interesting. So the students had high levels of political toleration, high levels of feeling like they belong to a school, and yet low levels of political knowledge. And I think there's something that these were year 7 students, but what that research has allowed me to do within the school is actually pinpoint the weaknesses and more questions to students of things that we can be doing. And I think that was a really important thing to sort of highlight, that students are not coming to school with that political knowledge, and sometimes we take that for granted, that they know what Parliament is, they know what the word democracy means and the importance of that. So I think that's really key for teachers moving forward, to make sure that their students do something with that research. So we're going to go off and actually use the student parliament to find out how they can instill a bit more political knowledge with younger years. So it was just a comment really that I had, not ever to undersell the importance of active citizenship in schools.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think those are really important points. I think we've always viewed in the subject community that all of these things are interconnected. So you can't do bits, you can't just teach the politics without looking at communities, without looking at the rights framework within which those things come from. So we always have to make sure that we are joining the dots for our students. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to go now. Anthony's got his hand up. So do you want to ask your question, Anthony?
Yes, thank you. I'm currently running a series of community action workshops here in Cambridge, where I'm finding that actually the parents as well don't know nearly enough about the essentials of democracy. And I'm wondering, to what extent do local councils and other community groups actually need to play their part in educating the parents in order to support the children? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last election, I did some lessons with year 6s in my child's school, and loads of the parents were coming back saying how their children were educating them on the function of general elections and how they work. So maybe it's the other way round, that actually we need more of the children to be educating their parents, who then come back to us and ask quite good questions about, tell us what else you're doing in the curriculum. And I think that somebody else mentioned that, the extent to which parents know what we're actually doing in the curriculum, because I think that's one way, my teaching experience, of getting even more support for the subject. I don't know if any of our panel want to come in the few minutes we've got left on that.
Just to say, in our literature review, which we published a short summary for teachers, there are some examples in the research about how children learning about issues like elections or learning about media literacy and talking about news stories, when they take it home, it has a kind of amplifying effect on the impact, and it creates a greater likelihood that children will develop positive habits around those teaching themes. So you know, rather than being concerned, as some people were in the early days of citizenship, about this kind of social educational role, it does feel like the curriculum can have a kind of wash back effect out into families, and then it amplifies the effect it has back in school. I just wanted to follow up what Sarah said, though, because she said what I was going to say. Any teachers here who want to participate can get exactly the same format report that Sarah had, which gives you your data at a school level. And then what she's doing is analysing that with her students and devising an action plan to improve their citizenship outcomes at school level. So it's the ideal data-led way to do some collaborative school improvement. So do contact us via the ACT website if you want to do that at some point this year.
Thank you very much, Lee. That's a really good thing to share with everyone. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes now, so it feels right now to draw things to a close. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. A very dark and miserable Monday evening, but this has been fascinating. We've heard so many grounds for optimism, really, I think, in terms of where we go next with our subject. It is often very challenging, but I'm always incredibly inspired by how our subject community are able to just move things forward in leaps and bounds constantly. And it's such a shame that more schools are not benefiting from this subject. And I think we definitely need more stewards out there leading schools to try and make sure that we get the kind of citizenship education that every child deserves and should be a common entitlement. The idea that you can have such an important subject as this and not really throw the political support behind it, or make decisions on behalf of your school that this is what we need our children to learn, seems crazy to me. So thank you all very much for this evening. Can I thank the panel for giving up their time and sharing their research and their comments and their experiences. Do keep in touch with us. Please do look at the 5 big ideas and give us your comments back on that. We're in the process of developing our strategy for the next 5+ years at the moment. And we really want those ideas to help us shape that as we move forward. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Jess, for organising it. Thank you, Liz, for looking at the questions and giving me guidance as well. So thank you all very much, and I'm going to draw it to a close there, and good evening.